So for some of us screenwriters out there or people who love to write stories, is there like a market for people who can write transmedia projects kind of on spec, the same way I'd write like a script for a TV show that I love? If I like identify a story world out there in the market that might not be like utilized as much as I think it could, would I be able to write a spec transmedia project for that and get a meeting to pitch that to those types of people? Does that happen in the industry very often?
So developing transmedia projects on spec absolutely could happen. And if you have a vision of how a story can extend across multiple platforms as a way to build more revenue, to engage audiences, to build brand equity, to be able to revive a public domain story world, or maybe it's an original story world, and you can do it on spec. Whatever it is, you can absolutely do that on spec. Now, how you pitch it is going to be dependent on who you pitch to. And so if you're pitching that to a movie producer or a movie studio, then you probably don't want to go in with all your transmedia guns blazing right at first. You want to, if they're in the business of film, you want to be able to push your film, the film idea within the plan, front and center. And you want to have that be the centerpiece, tentpole, driving platform of the whole project. And then everything else are ancillary opportunities to scale the project bigger in the long term, to be able to front load pre-awareness before the film comes out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you walk into a book publisher to pitch to a book publisher, you're going to have the novel front and center. If you walk into a television network, you're going to have the TV show front and center. If you walk into a private equity opportunity, then you can kind of position the whole brand front and center and how everything interplays. So it really just depends on how you pitch it to whom you're talking to. But I think as far as speccing things out and going ahead and understanding and developing how the story interplays across multiple platforms, I'm very bullish on. I'm a big fan of doing that, because I think that then shows what the opportunity is to the person to whom you're pitching. And so if you just walk in just with a film pitch, and then after the film pitch you say, oh yeah, well, and we could do this and this and this, and just kind of spit it off the top of your head, that doesn't have the substance of you being able to say, here's the film, but then here's the strategy that I want to use to be able to generate audience while the film is in development and pre-production, production, and post-production. I want to be able to work this thing for 2 years across these 4 platforms that are going to get the demographic that we need, and here's how I'm going to do it, and here are the story ideas that are going to work on that platform, natively designed for those platforms. So you have to understand the type of stories that work on Instagram as opposed to the type of stories that work on Snapchat, as opposed to the type of stories that work as a short story on Wattpad, whatever it is. Here's the story ideas that are natively designed for those platforms. Then here, after we release the film, I want to be able to release these 3 things to be able to extend the experience of the people that go to the theater. And then 2 years down the road, if everything goes well, I want to be able to do this, 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 and here's how it all plays together. And then what they'll see is there was a secret that we posed in the Wattpad short story that was released a year before the film ever came out, that we're now going to pull on and be able to develop this other thing that we're going to then release 3 years down the road, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden now you show your strategic expertise, and it seems more substantial. When it comes to investment and pitching, investors, they bet on the horse and they bet on the jockey. And the horse is the product. You got to have a good script, got to have a good product, right? But they also bet on the jockey. The problem bet on the jockey, especially if you're an independent filmmaker or a filmmaker who's early in their career and you don't have the credits that other jockeys have. You have to be able to display an expertise or a value that makes that investor say, this person has something special. And if this is your first film or your second film and you don't have the big IMDb page, if you can show the transmedia strategy of how to grow the brand, then all of a sudden in my experience, as long as it's good, right? I mean, the creative is the variable, right? I mean, sometimes people don't get investments not because it's a bad model, just because it's a bad story or they haven't executed the story. So let's just presume that it's a good idea, a good story, the whole thing. Then you're able to show your expertise, your value. This person has something special that they have this thing planned out. And now this jockey may not be like the other jockeys, but it's something that I can bet on. And so, but how you position that is all dependent to whom you're pitching. When it goes back to that empathetic pitching topic of to whom you're pitching, what do they care about, and how do I tailor the pitch to them? Which means you may have 7 different or 10 different or 17 different versions of your pitch so that you can go around town and pitch different people, but all of a sudden it's really focused and targeted to them. But I think the fundamental question is, do I go ahead and spec this thing out? I think the more you spec it out, the better. The more you spec it out, the better. If you can actually execute some of the front-end pre-awareness transmedia ideas and actually point to your audience, that's the better. That's the best. If you can't do that, then at least have the plan of, this is what I'm going to do as soon as we do this deal, as soon as we get solidified, this is my strategy. And the more you have, I think it's always the better. If you can have a script written, that's better than having a treatment written, I think. If you can't have the treatment written, have something, have a good one sheet. If you can't have a one sheet, have something. If you just walk in with an idea, ideas are a dime a dozen. We've heard it 1,000 times, the old cliche, right? Like people don't invest into ideas. Anybody, we could all sit in a room and come up with 100,000 amazing ideas that would be great transmedia projects, great movies, great TV shows, but that's not what people invest into. They invest into ideas that have execution attached to it. Will the person execute on the idea, and how can you show people that you can execute on the idea? And the more substance you have, and the more strategy you have, the more vision you have, the more enthusiasm you have, that all lends itself to the horse is good and the jockey's good.
You've mentioned Wattpad several times. Now that's a blogging platform?
Yeah, so Wattpad is a social media, maybe it's not a social, I'm not sure how that, it's Wattpad is a platform where people write short stories and share short stories. One of the hottest places that is being optioned for film right now is Wattpad. Agents, producers, studios, networks, they're every single month combing through Wattpad, finding short stories, one, that have good ideas, but they're seeing where the audiences go. Because the cool thing about digital platforms is you can see all the analytics. You can see how many likes they have, how many followers they have, all that stuff. And so they see, oh, this is a cool story, and this is, the audiences are gravitating to this. All of a sudden, they use the data and the analytics to option that story to then develop into a feature. And so right now, I think the 2 hottest platforms and mediums to understand, to be able to get optioned, isn't the spec script, it's Wattpad and podcasts. There were 8 podcasts optioned for TV last fall. 8. But I mean, one of my favorite I thought was amazing was Dirty John. Dirty John was a tremendous podcast based off an LA Times article, developed into a podcast based on the success of the podcast. Connie Britton was in a TV show, I think it was A&E, I think picked it up, right? And so ABC picked up several podcasts. All the networks are mining podcast and mining Wattpad for material, because it shows pre-awareness in the marketplace, right? And for independent producers, it's very competitive to jump around town trying to option the books, like novels, trying to option novels before other people, super competitive and super expensive. The Hunger Games, the novels of the Hunger Games were actually optioned 3 months before they ever hit the market. And so the option game with novels is crazy. And most of us, like mere mortals, don't have $30,000 or $50,000 laying around that I can slap down on an option on a book. And so now independent producers are looking at other places where stories come from. And that's where one, the public domain is important, but now Wattpad and podcast are really ripe for people to swoop in and option some things in a less competitive market. Now the problem with that is now the networks are starting to like get hip on Wattpad and podcast, and so now there's more competition in those markets. But there's always going to be, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Snapchat, whatever it is, these platforms they can be used to seed IP. So if I know that as an independent creator, if I know that there are networks and studios and agents and producers trolling in a good way, Wattpad and podcast for content, then all of a sudden I'm going to say, why don't I have a short story on Wattpad and a podcast on the iTunes store and have my feature film ready to go? Because now what I've done is I've increased my odds of getting exposure and being discovered, and I can point to the pre-awareness of the audience that I aggregate on those platforms. And so I can point to the number of people that have read my short story, point to the number of people that subscribe to my podcast, and if that's enough to get me the meeting, I can say, and the feature film script is already ready. And so it's just maximizing the opportunity. Honestly, I don't understand why everybody doesn't do that. The reason people don't do that is they don't want to take the time to learn how to do the podcast. They don't want to take the time to learn how to do the short story and Wattpad. And it seems, I don't like social media. Everybody just argues about Donald Trump and all that. That's true. Don't use it to argue politics. Use it to seed and leverage your IP to be able to get to the point where you can do the things that you want to do. And these are opportunities that have never been available in human history. And people are using them for dumb stuff. Let's use them as a tool for independent creators in this amazing way to be able to flip it to where now you can really live your dream of being on set, shooting your movie, optioning your script, whatever it is. In order to get there, there are opportunities that are just sitting on the table ready to go.
And how does one know if something is in the public domain?
There are websites that collect all this stuff, and that if you Google public domain science fiction, public domain fantasy, there are websites that will catalog all the things that have already moved into the public domain, and then so what I would suggest is go there first, and then begin developing out of there first. Eventually, you just probably want to double check with an attorney just to make sure. But it's 70 years after the death of the author. Typically, things move into the public domain. But double check with an attorney before you produce something. But there are not services, but there are websites that catalog all that information that are great resources to tap into.